Hi, my name is Corey Hart. I'm an education specialist with Vermont Fish and Wildlife, and this is part 4 of a 4-part series called Scat Tracks, designed for elementary age students across Vermont. So far we have covered gray fox, gray squirrel, and beaver. Our last species that we're going to be covering this year is going to be the eastern wild turkey. Wild turkeys are extremely fascinating, especially in Vermont. For a couple reasons. First is we didn't always have turkeys in Vermont. We did, and then we lost them, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But thanks to some restoration work, we now have turkeys flourishing across the state. There are 5 subspecies of turkeys in North America. The eastern wild turkey is the most widely distributed turkey that we have. So to identify a wild turkey, we're going to focus on a couple different things. First, before we get into identification, we have to focus on the types of turkeys, meaning male and female and the young. So first off, we have what are referred to as hens. So the hens are the female turkey. They're typically a lot duller in coloration. Then we have what are referred to as the toms, also known as a gobbler. So a tom is a male turkey, and they're really bright. And they're bright and colorful because they're trying to attract their mate. So they're trying to attract the hens. One of the other reasons that the hens are really kind of dull in color, and you see this a lot in nature, especially with bird species, is it's a defensive mechanism for them. They kind of blend in a little bit better than their male counterparts who are bright and colorful to attract a mate. Then we have what are referred to as jakes. So a jake is a young male turkey. One thing when we're talking about toms and jakes is they have a couple characteristics other than the really bright colorations like you can see on the screen right there. They also occasionally have what is referred to as a beard. But the beard's not a great way to tell them apart because females, while not overly common, can also have beards. And the beard isn't located like with my beard right here, right on my chin. The beard is located a little bit further down the body. And with young jakes, typically their beard is only going to be a couple inches. But an old tom might have or gobbler for that matter, might have a beard that it can be up to 17 inches in length. And that's about as long as a beard as you get. And they grow a couple inches a year, about 3 to 5 inches per year is how much they'll grow. But one thing a lot of people don't realize is with that beard growth, once it gets so big, it eventually reaches the point where it's dragging as the turkey's walking, and it actually just gets worn down. So while you do have some growth, you have a lot of it just gets worn down as it's walking across the landscape. So far we've talked about toms, jakes, and hens. We're also going to be discussing jennies. So a jenny is a young female turkey, similar to a hen. So just like the jake is the young male turkey, the jenny is the young female turkey. And then lastly, the 5th one we're going to be discussing is the poult. So the poult are the small chicks, so the young of the turkeys. So now we're going to talk about a few things that all turkeys, so both toms and hens have in common, and that is a couple key features. And the first is monocular vision, meaning that they can see just about 360 degrees around them, which is really fascinating when you think about it. Meaning they don't really have to turn their head. They can see completely around based on the way their eyesight is. Not entirely 360, but just about it. Another key thing is they can see in color, and they can see extremely well, which is why frequently, if you're a hunter or know people that hunt, when they go out hunting for turkeys, they have to wear camouflage. So that so if I went out there just like this, turkeys would see me. Maybe not so much with the green, but definitely with my blue jeans that I have on that would stand right out to them. And one of the reasons they have such good eyesight is due to the toms when they do their mating display, which we'll get into that. So color really plays a key feature in the life cycle of turkeys, especially when we talk about things like mating. While turkeys have excellent eyesight, they actually have terrible sense of smell. Which is why when they're looking for their food, it's expected that shape and color plays a lot more of a role than smell does, compared to a lot of other species that locate their food based on smell. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the life cycle of species. But before we do, I wanted to mention one other thing about our toms or our jakes as well, and that is the spurs that are on their legs. The spurs help to distinguish between a male and female turkey, whereas mentioned before that typically just the males have the beard, but that's not always the case. Females can have beards, but only males have the spurs. The spurs are also another really prominent feature that is used when they're sparring, meaning they're fighting other turkeys. So when it's their mating season, prominent gobblers or tom turkeys will actually spar with younger turkeys, and that's how they fight and go about finding their mate. All right, so now we're going to be discussing the life cycle of turkeys. Turkeys have a very interesting life cycle, particularly because they're a very social bird, meaning they interact with other turkeys, and we frequently find them in flocks. So we're going to start our journey through their life cycle in the spring, when their mating season takes place. So as we mentioned earlier, typically toms are going to go and they're going to try to attract a mate. And turkeys are what are referred to as polygamous, meaning one male or one tom turkey might mate with several other female turkeys. So one of the ways that they go and attract mate is they do something called fanning. So they've got these fans. So you can see the fan right here that the toms will actually display, and they'll do these big bright displays and colorations, but they'll also fight with the other jakes as well, or other toms. And they'll spar with those spurs that you saw earlier. So this is where the really bright and colorful colorations really come into play. And you'll hear a lot of turkey calling as well, which when we get to the signs of turkeys, we'll play a turkey call for you, and you can hear some of the calls. So turkeys need a lot of different types of habitat, and one of the key features of habitat they need, particularly in the spring, is an area that's kind of brushy, or even like a field, kind of like we're in right now on the field edge, works great for their nests. So they're going to have a nest that they're going to create, and they're going to stay in that nest for about 26 to 30 days or so, only leaving to get food. So the eggs are slightly larger than a chicken egg, like you might find at the grocery store. They're speckled, and a typical clutch is going to be about 10 to 12 eggs. And remember that turkey stays on those eggs that entire time, other than getting up to get food. Typically that clutch is going to be about 10 turkeys or so, or 10 poults, sorry, or young turkeys. The first 3 weeks of the turkey's lives are the most crucial, and that's when they're the most vulnerable to other predators. So speaking of mortality, a hatchling group of poults of about 11 by midsummer will be reduced to only about 3 to 7 poults, meaning that's a really high range of mortality in their first few weeks of life. One other thing I didn't mention earlier is within about 12 to 24 hours of being born, the turkeys are able to actually follow their mother. Within a couple weeks, they're going to start roosting up in trees. So the first time they go up and they roost, that coincides with their first molt. And as soon as they have that first molt, that actually protects them from foul weather. So their chance of survival by the time they start roosting actually really increases, because they molt and get those new feathers in, which is really crucial to their survival. So I mentioned really briefly earlier that turkeys are extremely social, meaning we'll find them in flocks. So as the summer progresses, we're going to see the turkeys are going to start to flock up, meaning they're going to group up together. By the time the fall rolls around, a pecking order, if you will be established within the flock between the males and the females that are within that flock. And they'll kind of have their own social structure that's all worked out. Over the course of the summer and fall, their home range is going to be about 250 to 500 acres. And their habitat needs are really unique in the fact that they need all different types of habitat. Compared to some species that just need certain types, turkeys have a wide range of needs. So whereas we're standing right now kind of in this messy kind of field, in this brushy area, this is a fairly suitable area for nesting habitat in the spring. Other types of habitat that turkey needs throughout their life cycle, or throughout the year for that matter, is upland. So upland habitat with plenty of oaks, beech trees, things like that, nuts that they can forage, but also near ample fields. So especially old overgrown fields, farmlands, field edges are really good areas for their habitat. And another thing that we haven't really discussed so far is roosting. So during the evening hours or at night, turkeys actually roost in trees to escape predators. So one technique hunters actually use to find roosting turkeys is they might go out the night before, and they'll go out and they'll make a lot of noise. So one technique is they'll take a car door and slam it really loud next to a field, and that'll tell them where the turkeys are. You actually hear them roosting. So the next morning they can go back and be somewhat close. They have an idea of where those turkeys are because the turkeys react to that loud noise. They also react to predators. So an owl call is another very common one that somebody might use. And that's going to get the turkeys making noise. They'll be very loud in the trees, and you can't miss it. It's extremely noticeable. Winters in Vermont can be very critical with turkey survival rates. So if we have a winter where we have a significant snowfall, it can make it really challenging for them to reach the food that's beneath the ground. So they can scratch through about 8 to 12 inches of snow. After it gets too deep, though, it becomes a real challenge. So if it's a really cold, deep winter, we'll have a lot of turkey mortality during that as well. Areas that we find turkeys during the winter months are typically southern-facing slopes, where there's a lot less snow, as well as low-lying valleys. So areas where there might not be as much snow coverage. So they tend to flock to those type of regions during the winter months, and then move out to other areas during the rest of the year. Prior to European settlement across North America, there was an estimated 10 to 12 million wild turkeys, and that's a lot of turkeys. Archaeological evidence actually shows that they were a crucial food source for Native Americans. A combination of loss of habitat due to clearing for farmland and unregulated hunting resulted in, from the period between the 1700s and the 1800s, the turkey population was reduced from 10 to 12 million down to only about 200,000 across the entire North American continent. And that's a huge drop. And that was due exclusively because of habitat loss, so as we clear lands for farms, but also due to unregulated hunting. So we did not have the Fish and Wildlife Department back there. We did not have hunting seasons. And what actually ended up happening is by the early 1900s, turkeys were essentially extirpated from Vermont, meaning we did not have any wild turkeys in Vermont. In 1969, 31 wild turkeys were captured in New York and reintroduced into Vermont, in what has become a huge success. So today we now have approximately 75,000 turkeys in Vermont, and those came from those 31 that were captured. So over the first few years, they reproduced very successfully, and then we moved them around the state. So we take the successful turkeys and move them into different pockets of the state. And now we're to the point where we have so many turkeys across Vermont. But not only was the success from those original 31 turkeys important to Vermont, they're important to actually other states as well in their restoration efforts. So the turkeys in Vermont have actually been brought to other states. So as far away as North Carolina, Maine, New Hampshire, those programs, or those turkey restoration programs, stemmed from turkeys that were brought from Vermont. The furthest our turkeys have actually traveled for restoration work is actually all the way to West Germany. In 1973, a hunting season on turkeys in Vermont was implemented. And that was the first time turkeys have been hunted in Vermont in over 100 years. Now we have both a spring season and a fall season to help us control our turkey populations. We control our populations through regulated hunting. We also have something that's called a brood survey that we conduct every spring, which is crucial to our management. It doesn't, I should point out, influence the turkey numbers that we hunt for the upcoming year, but instead what it does is it shows us the overall impact of things like climate change are having on the populations. So the brood survey basically shows us how successful the turkeys have been. And we're going to have fluctuations. But instead, what we look at with that survey is over time. So over a period of 10 to 15 years, as there's been a sharp decrease, we'll be able to see that. compared to just the yearly fluctuations. And the brood survey is all done thanks to people like yourself. So not only do our biologists fill it out, but we also have people that are really passionate about their natural resources. Complete the survey, which you can find on our website each spring. And they just count the number of poults that they see, the number of turkeys they see in their travels, and report it to us. And it gives us a lot of information. So turkeys require a wide range of food, so their diet really varies. During the spring, they're going to be eating primarily insects because the poults need a lot of energy. So they have a really high protein diet during that time of year, which is why during the spring we're going to find them primarily in fields or along field edges where they're out eating insects. As the year progresses, during the fall, we're going to start to find them in areas where there's a lot of acorns or beech nuts, as well as berries and things like that they're going to eat. During the winter month, they're going to start to scratch at the ground. You'll see scratch marks on snow and things like that, where they're getting after stuff that's underneath the surface, whether it be acorns or things like that. So their diet's really varied and it changes throughout the year. So primarily insects, berries, and nuts and things like that.
All right, so now we are to the Scat and Track kind of portion of our episode, where we're going to talk about the different types of sign that you might find when you go out on your hike, when we're specifically talking about turkeys. The first sign that I'm going to be looking for is forage. So areas that have been scuffed up at the ground, or that the ground has been scuffed up by turkeys. So right now there's no snow on the ground. If there was snow, you'd see where they've actually kind of scratched at the snow to get to the stuff underneath. And oftentimes you'll see where they took their claws and they kind of scuffed at the ground. You'll see little marks on the ground from their feet. Other types of sign that we're going to look for is fairly common to actually find turkey feathers when we're out there. From when they actually fly up into their roosts, they might lose one. So these are fairly common to find on the ground when we're out there searching. And one thing we didn't mention before that I do want to go over now is wild turkeys can fly. They don't fly long distances. They can fly really fast though. So they can fly about 35 miles an hour, and they typically only fly short distances, meaning they're just flying up into their roost or into a different type of habitat. They're not making any long distance flights, and that's primarily due to how much they weigh. Other types of sign that we're going to be looking for during our travels would be turkey scat. So a scat of turkey is typically kind of long and stringy and kind of together, just like you can see in my hand. So and this piece here has like several portions of it where it's kind of stringy and kind of shaped differently. And this would be a good example of tom turkey scat. Hen turkey scat is slightly different. So it's fairly common for a hen turkey, for its scat, to be kind of spiral shaped. And it'll be shaped almost like, kind of like a snail, is the best way to imagine it. And the reason the tom and the hen have different kind of shaped scat is their internal anatomy is a little bit different. And that results in different shapes. When I'm looking for tracks or sign of turkeys, while they do fly, they're primarily a land-based critter, meaning they walk around on the ground. So you usually see areas, and you'll see right on the screen right there, an image of what their tracks look like. And you'll see them a lot of times, it almost looks like they're dragging their feet or they're scuffing, and you'll see areas as they're moving across. And it's really prominent, especially in snow. The last type of sign that I'm going to find when I'm out there looking for turkeys is going to be calls. So actually hearing the turkeys gobble, and if you went out there by yourself, so as a class, you probably won't hear any turkeys gobble. But if you were to go out alone and just sit and wait kind of on a field edge, or take a car door like I mentioned earlier and slam it really loud, that usually will spook them and you'll hear the noise. So now you know a little bit about turkeys. Now it's time to go out with your teacher or your parent and look for sign of them. So remember, you're going to be wanting to look in areas that are kind of on hardwood edges, maybe along field edges. They like a lot of different types of habitat. When these videos go out, they're going to be going out, hopefully in the winter will be when you watch this, but who knows when you watch it. So during the winter months, turkeys have hopefully been eating a lot of nuts, in the fall, and that's going to give them a lot of fat to get through the winter. And you're going to find them usually in upland habitats still during the winter months, but on southern facing slopes, because that's where there's going to be less snow. So I would start looking for them there.